recording the oral history of Richard Keep, D of 92 Armored Cavalry Reconnaissance,
Right.
12th Armored Division, Second World War, taking the interview here at the 69th Annual Reunion of the 12th Armored Division, July 25th, 2015. Dick, I want to thank you for sitting down with me. And the way we start this is, tell me a little bit about your family life, how you grew up, and where you were when the war started.
Well, I was a farm boy, and at 18, I got my draft notice, and from there I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, and in August of, it'd be 73.
Mm-hmm.
And I took 5 months of training to do anything that anybody could do, you might say, in the Army,
Mm-hmm.
when it come to weapons and machinery. And they told us that we'd have a very short, hard training, and it was nothing but Cavalry Replacement Training Center. And that's all it was designed for, that particular camp. And at Christmas time, we got to go home on a furlough. And on New Year's Eve, I went to Fort Meade, Maryland. And at Fort Meade, I took 3 more weeks of just training more. And then they boarded the ship for Barry, Wales. And it was a victory ship in a big convoy. We went across the North Atlantic, which was horrible in the wintertime. The waves were so high you couldn't see some of your escort ships. And 14 days of that. And 14 days while we landed at Barry, Wales. And then I went to a small camp in Glastonbury, England. It's probably in the southern part of England. And this particular camp that I was in, the first thing you did when you walked in, they handed you a mattress cover and told you, there's your pile of straw, fill it up with straw. And there was only 3 Quonset huts in this little camp they made a camp out of a city park in this little village or town. And so then they gave you the 2 buckets, one for coal and one for coke. And that's what you heated your Quonset hut with. And you slept on your bunk with your straw mattress. Well, which wasn't really that bad, I guess, and then as a replacement, they take you to do anything they want you to do. And I sometimes I'd drive Jeeps for somebody, or I'd drive a truck or an ambulance, and then they came to me one day and they said, you can take shorthand. It says on your slip here. I said, yes. So I think that's probably what kept me from going probably on D-Day, because they had me going to these high-ranking officer meetings, and I'd take shorthand and transcribe it and make bulletins out of it. Well, I really didn't think I was meant to do that. So after so long a time, I told them, I said, I don't like this. Well, I'm just a poor old farm boy. And the captain said, son, you'll never hear a shot fired in anger if you'll stay with us. And I said, well, can you get me out of here? So he said, I'll find your cavalry position someplace. So from there on, I went up to Tidworth Barracks. Well, before that, I'd done something that probably nobody else that will ever talk to you. They took 12 of us from this group and said, they kind of measured us up for size. Said, you're about 5'10", we want everybody about the same height. They took us to an abandoned camp that was not very far from Glastonbury. And for 3 weeks, we done nothing but manual arms, the fancy type, flipping the rifle over your shoulder, dropping the rifle, throwing it to the next guy. And we didn't know what was going on. And then after the finish of the 3rd week, we went to a parade before the King and Queen of England, which was a lot of other people parading in this, but that 12 of us done that for that 1 day show. And then we went back to being a replacement. Well, then as time went on, I went to Tidworth Barracks, where the 12th came to. But Tidworth was a big camp, brick buildings, no tent city like the 12th knew. Well, one day they came to me and they said, this was like in August, and they said, you're going to this camp that was about 20 miles maybe, or 20 kilometers from Tidworth. And believe it, and people probably never heard of this, but there was 299 soldiers that had been taken out of detention camps and prisons and whatever. And I wasn't a bad boy. They just needed one more to make the 300 quota. Well, they started training those guys, and there was some of them that didn't even know how to load a rifle. And this sergeant come to me and he said, it looks like you know how to do all this. And he said, would you help me a little bit? So why not, you know? So we trained there for about 3 weeks. And they said, all right, here we go. We're tonight at midnight, we're loading up, and we'll take you down to one of the ports. So they called my name that night to get on the truck. And he grabbed me and said, no, you don't go. You stay here. Well, he didn't know where I was going to go, and so I just went back to my old tent and said, come and eat breakfast with us. So I did, and he said, come and eat at lunch at noon. At noon, he said, well, I got a place where I know where you're going. So that's how I ended up in the 12th Armored, because a 12th Armored man had broke his collarbone, and I was his replacement to go to the 12th 92nd. So that's how I ended up with the 12th.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, just to tell a couple of stories that I think are kind of interesting that happened to me. I could speak some German because my grandmother and mother used to speak German to each other, so us kids wouldn't know where the cookies were hid and things like that. So anyway, as I got into the 92nd and they found out that I could speak a little bit of German, but they gave me a Jeep. Said, that's your Jeep, you're the mortar man, because I could run a mortar. And he said, you got a 2-man crew there. So I was kind of the interpreter for our little platoon. And one of the experiences I had that shows how the German people thought, this was after we were into Germany, and he told me, he said, go pick what we do, come into a small town at night or dusk, set up our machine guns and our booby traps. And so the lieutenant said, well, come and take that house over there. Just go tell those people to move out. That's my command post for the night. So there was an older fellow and his wife, and I suppose their grandkids, and about 6 or 8 people, children and all, and they started crying and carrying on, and finally the old man of the house, he said, you know, I said, we're not going to tear up anything, we're not, he said, the Germans told us, the soldiers told us we'd probably be shot or they'd burn our houses and whatever, and I said, no, we're not going to do that. Well, they moved down the street with some of their bedclothes and everything, and pretty soon the lieutenant hollered at me. He said, hey, tell them people to go back to that house. He said, that's a higher house than a lot of in this town, and they might use that for an aiming post for artillery or mortar. So I went back, but I thought, well, sugar will catch more flies than vinegar will, and so I was a nice guy. And I said, hey, you've got all the little kids, move back to the house. We decided to take another one, which he had told me to take another little one. When they moved back into the house, the old man come and he said, well, we thought we'd be mistreated and, and all that. And I tried to talk to him some more, and pretty soon he said, come with me. Well, most of those houses didn't have basements in those little villages. So we went down the basement, and there was a row of shelves that was completely empty except one little fruit jar. He reached back behind it and unhooked that shelf and moved it out. And it was a doorway for a little room he had back in this basement. And in there was loaves of bread, margarine, crates of eggs, rings of bologna and liverwurst, and wine. So he said, here, you take some of this. So I put eggs in my helmet, a loaf of bread, a couple bottles of wine, and some ring bologna on my arm, and the bread and wine in my pockets. And I asked him then, where did you get all this food? And he said, well, we have to save it or the German soldiers will take it. So I went back to my vehicle and the one adjoining me, and I said, we don't eat rations tonight. So we fried that up on our little stoves, and that was better than rations. But it was just one of the things the oddities of war that people don't think about. But now how much more or what?
Whatever, as much or
Okay,
as
I'll
little
give
as
you
you'd like
another
to talk about.
funny thing that is kind of we were sent on a kind of a different mission, and they liked for us to capture somebody so they could interrogate them. Well, this particular time, there was 9 of us, a lieutenant and a little sergeant that went. Of course, all this time I'm buck private. I just go along for the ride. So we go up. We'd been trying to get through this little village, and we couldn't get through any other way because we didn't have enough heavy guns to get through there, and they had a pretty good force down. But we sat up on this high hill overlooking us, and they had planes strafing down there and some artillery, and it wasn't a very big village, but the way the roads were, we couldn't get around it or through it. So they said, well, try and go find a prisoner. See if we can find out a little more. So there was 9 of us went up this high hill, broad daylight. And the lieutenant, he took 4 guys, and then this little sergeant took us. There was 4 of us. Well, we had an appointed time to move back down to the bottom of the hill. So he said, now, whatever you do, you're either there at that time or keep going because somebody else got in trouble. So we finally goes up this hill, sneaking along and whatever, and the sergeant's right ahead of, he's just a little guy. He's right ahead of me, and pretty soon he turned around to me and he went like this, to be quiet. Well, we were anyway, but then anyway, he pointed up there, and there was a German soldier in a foxhole. Just see his neck and his helmet. So he whispered to me, he said, now, I'm going to crawl up there and I'm going to try and get him. And I won't be able to shoot if he turns around real quick. So he said, you lay against this tree, and if he makes one move, shoot. Get him. So he crawls up to the foxhole and taps the guy in the back of the helmet. And the guy turns around, I can see it like it's today. Here's this German turns around, and here's this American looking at him right eyeball to eyeball. And he motions for him to stand up, but all this time he's going like this, to be quiet. And I can't figure what's going on here. So then when the German crawls out of the foxhole, he makes him lay down, and they both crawl along the ground together back to my tree. And when he gets back to my tree, why, we get around behind it because there's a little slope behind the tree, and he said, I asked him, I said, what's with this quiet? What's this business here? He said, his buddy is in this foxhole asleep. And so we didn't want to, see, we're so few, and we don't want to make a big noise, big disturbance, because we don't know how many's up there. Well, then I asked him, I said, well, how many's up here? And he said 85 Germans in different areas on this top of this high hill in the timber. So we stand there, and I talk to him, and pretty soon we hear somebody hollering. And what it is, he says, Hans, wer bist du? And he said, come essen. So I said to this guy, what's your name? And he says, Hans. My buddy wants me to come and eat with him. And they were going to chow someplace, and he didn't know where his buddy had went to. So anyway, we got him back down, and the other fellows didn't meet us then. They got in trouble, but they happened to be close to where they had a kitchen set up. And here come chow time, and all these people come to eat, and they weren't going to start no ruckus because there were so few of us. But that now that I think about it, I might have told this story years ago on this tape.
Totally okay.
And but that was just one of the couple of things that kind of struck me as different. So.
Well, sir, I want to thank you for your time
Well, you're more than welcome.
and for your service.